John Mars, heir to the world's largest candy empire, was supposed to live a life as sweet as the chocolate bars that made his family billions. But behind the glossy image of Mars Inc., whispers began to circulate about something bitter, a decades-long family feud kept hidden from the public and protected by an almost obsessive corporate secrecy. For generations, the Mars family had perfected the art of invisibility. No flashy interviews, no public meltdowns, no reality TV-style wealth flaunting. But insiders claimed that this silence masked deep divisions, rifts between siblings over control, visions for the company, and even who should inherit the power. While the Mars name appeared united on paper, private boardrooms allegedly told a different story. Sharp words, walkouts, and locked doors. In the 1992nd, rumors swirled that John Mars clashed with his late brother Forrest Mars Sr. over the company's expansion into new markets and ethical sourcing policies. Forrest pushed for aggressive international dominance. John preferred a quieter, more traditional approach. The disagreements weren't just about money, they were about philosophy, pride, and control over a legacy worth tens of billions. Then there was the question of succession. Unlike other billion-dollar families that parade heirs in front of cameras, the Mars family kept the next generation almost entirely invisible. But according to former executives, there was tension over who would be groomed to lead. In a company where everything was private, speculation became a sport, and the smallest changes in leadership were dissected like political coups. Yet John Mars never gave the press a soundbite. He perfected the poker face, refusing to confirm or deny any feud. And maybe that was the most intriguing part. The man at the center of a candy empire worth more than $100 billion, living in quiet Wyoming, hiding a story far more dramatic than any corporate press release could ever reveal. They once stood at the very top, but what happened next? Join the Hidden Billionaires to uncover their story. John Franklin Mars was born on the 15th of October, 1935, in the heart of the American Midwest, Oak Park, Illinois, into what most would consider a chocolate dynasty. His father, Forrest Mars Sr., was the legendary yet notoriously intense businessman who had transformed a small family candy shop into a burgeoning empire. His mother, Audrey Ruth, came from a quieter background, but her steady influence was one of the few calming forces in a household dominated by ambition. From the outside, John's childhood seemed gilded. There was no poverty to overcome, no desperate scramble for survival. But wealth didn't mean warmth. Forrest Sr. ran his home like he ran his company, with military precision and high expectations. Dinner table conversations were less about school or play and more about efficiency, strategy, and the Mars way of doing things. John grew up alongside his siblings, Forrest Jr. and Jacqueline, and although they shared the same lineage, each had distinctly different personalities. Forrest Jr. inherited their father's aggressive drive. Jacqueline leaned toward the arts and philanthropy. John, however, was the quiet observer, never the loudest voice in the room, but always the one who seemed to be listening more than speaking. Unlike many heirs of billion-dollar fortunes, John's path wasn't about rebellion against the family business. It was about proving himself worthy of it. That meant discipline. Even as a young man, he was sent to work in various parts of the company during summers, not in an executive office, but in packaging, logistics, and even delivery. Forrest Sr. wanted his children to understand every nut, bolt, and cocoa bean that went into Mars products. In school, John wasn't the flamboyant type. He attended Hotchkiss School in Connecticut, then Yale University, but classmates would later recall how reserved he was. While others networked loudly or sought the spotlight, John seemed almost allergic to unnecessary attention. He was already practicing what would become the Mars family hallmark: privacy as power. His father's philosophy left an indelible mark. The Mars way was simple: keep the company private at all costs. Avoid Wall Street's gaze. Never grant interviews. Let the products, not the people, be the brand. And in the Mars household, success was an expectation, not an achievement. It wasn't about getting rich, they already were. It was about protecting and expanding the legacy. But there was something else brewing in those early years. subtle signs of sibling rivalry. While they were still young, John and Forrest Jr. began to develop different ideas about how the company should grow. Jacqueline, as the only sister, often acted as a bridge, but even she couldn't always keep the peace. The seeds of future disputes were already being planted in those long Midwestern evenings, over meals in which silence could be just as heavy as conversation. By the time John graduated, he was ready to step into the business. Yet, unlike many second generation heirs who waltzed straight into top tier positions, John took a more methodical climb. This wasn't just a father's test, it was John's own way of ensuring he wasn't just the boss's son. He was about to enter the Mars machine, a place where loyalty was demanded, mistakes were costly, and family ties could be both an asset and a weapon. And as he would soon learn, building a global candy empire was far easier than keeping a family united. When John Mars officially entered the family business in the late 1952, Mars Inc. was already a formidable name in the candy world. M's, Milky Way, and Mars bars were household staples in America, but the company's ambitions were set far beyond U.S. borders. Forrest Sr., ever the strategist, saw a future in global domination, and his sons were expected to be the generals in that expansion. John's first years inside Mars Inc. were marked by quiet diligence. He didn't burst onto the scene with grandstanding moves. Instead, he immersed himself in the nuts and bolts of operations, supply chain logistics, quality control, international distribution. This slow, deliberate approach contrasted sharply with Forrest Jr.'s aggressive push into new territories. While Forrest favored rapid acquisitions and bold marketing, John's style was about precision and efficiency. By the 1972nd, Mars Inc. was on the brink of becoming a global powerhouse. John's role expanded significantly, especially in international markets. He was instrumental in establishing Mars's European stronghold, ensuring that M's, and Snickers became as ubiquitous in London and Paris as they were in Chicago and New York. It was during these years that Mars Inc. launched some of its most iconic products and acquisitions. John oversaw the strengthening of the pet food division, Pedigree and Whiskas, transforming the company from a candy maker into a diversified consumer goods empire. He understood something many didn't. The Mars brand wasn't just about sugar, it was about household trust. If people trusted Mars to feed their children, they could trust Mars to feed their pets. The company's success, however, was rooted in absolute secrecy. Mars Inc. avoided the stock market, refused to publish financial statements, and maintained an almost paranoid level of internal confidentiality. This wasn't just family tradition, it was a shield. Competitors couldn't fight what they couldn't see, and John, ever the quiet guardian, became one of the fiercest protectors of this corporate opacity. By the late 1982nd and early 1992nd, Mars Inc. had achieved a staggering level of influence. Industry insiders whispered about the Mars family's ability to dictate cocoa prices, influence global supply chains, and outmaneuver even the largest publicly traded rivals. Forbes began to take notice, and by the time John was in his 50s, his personal net worth had soared into the billions. But with great power came the strains of family leadership. The Mars siblings operated more like business partners than a warm family unit. Strategy meetings could be icy. Disagreements over expansion, ethical sourcing, and management hires sometimes escalated into tense standoffs. Still, John's reputation remained that of the steady hand, less volatile than Forrest Jr., more reserved than Jacqueline, but just as unyielding when it came to protecting Mars Inc.'s independence. The pinnacle of John's climb came in the 1992nd when he was appointed co-president of Mars Inc., sharing leadership with his siblings. Under their joint guidance, the company became the largest privately held company in America, a title that came with both pride and pressure. The media occasionally tried to draw the Mars family into the limelight, usually during industry shakeups or product controversies, but John never cracked. He turned down interviews, ignored reporters, and stayed firmly in the shadows. In a world where CEOs courted fame, John Mars made anonymity his crown jewel. And yet, behind the closed doors of the Mars boardroom, The cracks were widening. Decisions about the company's next era, who would lead, and how much power each branch of the family would wield threatened to unravel decades of disciplined secrecy. The climb to power had been steady and deliberate, but at the summit, the air was thin and the silence could be deafening. For most of his career, John Mars had mastered the art of staying out of the public eye. He wasn't photographed at red carpet galas, he didn't give keynote speeches at business conferences, and he certainly didn't live stream his life for adoring fans. But in the rarefied world of billionaires, you can't be invisible forever. The Mars name, even if the faces remained hidden, carried enormous weight. Competitors knew it, industry insiders knew it. And by the late 1992nd, the press began to dig more aggressively into the mystery behind the Mars fortune. They wanted to know what was really going on behind those guarded gates and confidential boardrooms. The first real fracture to seep into public awareness came through whispers of a deepening family rift. While the Mars siblings had managed to share power for decades, insiders claimed that major disagreements over global strategy were boiling over. Forrest Jr. allegedly wanted to push Mars Inc. into bold, high-risk ventures, everything from aggressive takeovers to pushing into emerging markets at breakneck speed. John, however, remained cautious, believing in steady growth and avoiding the glare of public markets. The disagreements were more than philosophical. They reportedly turned personal. According to former executives, meetings could end with slammed doors, raised voices, and even extended periods where certain family members simply refused to speak to each other. And yet, to the outside world, Mars Inc. remained the picture of unity. That was the Mars way. Never let outsiders see the fight. Then came the growing wave of ethical sourcing controversies in the chocolate industry. Investigations into cocoa farming in West Africa revealed disturbing evidence of child labor and human rights abuses in the supply chain dollar, issues that ensnared nearly every major chocolate producer, including Mars Inc. While the company issued carefully worded statements and pledged reforms, critics accused the family of moving too slowly, prioritizing secrecy and control over transparency and accountability. For John Mars, this was the nightmare scenario, a public scandal that couldn't be swatted away with silence. The company's low-profile strategy suddenly looked like aloofness, and the Mars family's insistence on privacy began to seem like a refusal to answer difficult questions. The personal toll was just as heavy. Running a multi-billion-dollar empire had left little room for personal life. Friends described John as polite but distant, disciplined to the point of austerity. His homes, even his primary estate in Wyoming, were more fortresses than residences, guarded not just from paparazzi, but from the unpredictability of the outside world. And as the next generation of Mars heirs grew up, tensions reportedly flared over succession plans. Which of the children, if any, would take the reins? Would the company remain entirely family-run, or would outside executives be given real power? Some insiders claim that the succession discussions reignited old sibling tensions, dredging up grievances that had never fully healed. While John never made public statements about the internal strains, his actions spoke volumes. He began to quietly step back from certain operational duties, letting trusted executives handle more of the day-to-day, a sign that even the most disciplined billionaire could feel the weight of a lifetime spent in corporate battle. The price of fame for John Mars wasn't tabloid humiliation or paparazzi harassment. It was something quieter, more corrosive. It was the erosion of trust inside the family. It was the gnawing realization that the empire you'd spent your life protecting might fracture from within, not from without. Still, John remained the silent sentinel, guarding both his privacy and the Mars legacy. But storms, especially the ones you pretend aren't there, have a way of finding the cracks. By the early 2002nd, John Mars began to retreat more deliberately from the front lines of the family business. The storm of internal disputes, growing public scrutiny over ethical issues, and the sheer weight of running one of the world's largest private companies had taken its toll. Unlike many billionaires who chase the spotlight or aggressively pursue new ventures, John chose a quieter path, one of reflection and subtle influence behind the scenes. While Forrest Mars Sr. and Jacqueline Mars maintained their roles in active leadership, John gradually handed over operational control to trusted executives, trusting them to navigate the increasingly complex global market. But this was no simple fade into retirement. Instead, John's approach was like a chess grandmaster, pulling back to strategize the next moves unseen by the world. Away from the public eye, John spent more time in Wyoming, where his sprawling estate became a sanctuary. Few outsiders were allowed beyond the gates. Here he embraced a life of relative simplicity compared to the high-stakes corporate world he had inhabited for decades. Private family moments, hunting trips, and a passion for conservation replaced boardroom battles, but even in this seeming seclusion, John's influence remained palpable. Through discreet channels, he continued to shape company policy and succession planning, ensuring that the Mars legacy would endure. His reputation as the family's wise patriarch grew internally, even as his public presence dwindled. Interestingly, despite the family's earlier divisions, reports suggest that the Mars siblings found new ways to collaborate, focusing on philanthropy and sustainability efforts. John quietly championed causes related to environmental conservation and education, a stark contrast to the cutthroat business persona of his earlier years. Yet, to the outside world, John Mars remained an enigma, a billionaire who preferred living modestly, away from the glare of media attention. Unlike his contemporaries who flaunted their wealth with luxury yachts and private jets, John's lifestyle was marked by discretion and a conscious effort to keep family matters private. This retreat from public life was not without surprises. In a few rare interviews and statements, John expressed concerns about the future of big family-run businesses in a modern world obsessed with transparency and social responsibility. He warned that secrecy, once a strength, could become a liability if it alienated customers and younger generations. John's life after the storm is a testament to the complexities of billionaire legacy, where success is not only measured by wealth, but by the ability to adapt, reflect, and sometimes step back gracefully. The Mars family's legacy is as much about the people behind the fortune as the empire itself. John Mars, like his siblings, has been intensely private about his personal life, revealing very little to the outside world. Yet behind the curtains of discretion lies a family dynasty preparing to pass its immense wealth and responsibility to the next generation. John is known to have 3 children, all raised with the same ethos that shaped their parents: humility, privacy, and a strong sense of duty. Unlike many heirs of billion-dollar fortunes, the Mars children were not thrust into the spotlight nor pressured to take immediate control of the business. Instead, they were encouraged to pursue their passions and develop their own identities away from the shadow of the family name. Within the family, the question of succession has always been delicate. John and his siblings have carefully balanced the need to preserve Mars Inc.'s family control with the realities of a complex global business. Rather than appointing any single heir as a future leader, the Mars family has favored a collective leadership model, spreading influence among trusted family members and longtime executives. Despite this, tensions have occasionally surfaced. The younger generation is growing up in a world very different from that of their parents. They are more vocal about social issues, sustainability, and corporate responsibility, pressures that sometimes clash with the older generation's preference for discretion and tradition. These differences have, according to insiders, sparked private debates about the future direction of the company. Beyond business, the Mars family has increasingly turned to philanthropy as a way to shape their legacy. John, Jacqueline, and Forrest Jr. have each established charitable foundations focused on causes such as education, environmental conservation, and health. John himself has been particularly passionate about wildlife preservation and supporting rural communities, echoing his quieter life in Wyoming. Despite occasional whispers of family discord, the Mars dynasty has remained remarkably united when it comes to charitable giving and legacy building. This unity extends to their efforts to educate and mentor the next generation, ensuring that the family's values and business acumen are passed down with care. As John Mars ages, the question remains, who will truly carry the torch forward? The Mars family's legacy is far from just a candy empire. It's a story of tradition, adaptation, and a fiercely guarded family bond that has lasted over a century. John Mars and his family have left an indelible mark on the global business landscape, not merely through their staggering fortune, but through the unique way they built and protected their empire. Unlike many modern billionaires who embrace publicity and personal branding, the Mars family rewrote the rules of private wealth, choosing and visibility and discretion as their greatest assets. At its core, the Mars legacy is about transforming a small confectionery shop into a sprawling multinational powerhouse without ever going public. This steadfast commitment to remaining private is both rare and revolutionary in the corporate world, especially for a company with annual revenues soaring well above $40 billion. The Mars family's model has inspired other wealthy families to rethink the benefits and burdens of public ownership. John Mars, in particular, embodied this philosophy. His leadership style was not about grand gestures or headline-making decisions. It was about quiet stewardship, operational excellence, and protecting the long-term health of the business. His approach showed that influence does not require the spotlight and that sometimes the most powerful forces work behind the scenes. Beyond business, the Mars family's impact extends to sustainability and social responsibility. While initially criticized for the slow response to cocoa sourcing controversies, in recent decades, the company has made significant strides toward ethical sourcing, reducing environmental impact, and supporting farming communities. These changes reflect an evolution influenced by the younger generation, but rooted in the values of careful management championed by John and his siblings. Their philanthropic efforts have also become a significant part of their legacy. Through various foundations, the Mars family has invested hundreds of millions into education, health, wildlife preservation, and community development. John's personal interest in conservation resonates with this broader mission to give back quietly but substantially. Culturally, the Mars family is viewed as a cautionary yet inspirational tale. They remind the world that enormous wealth can be preserved across generations, not through flashy innovation alone, but through discipline, secrecy, and a relentless focus on legacy. However, they also serve as a warning about the challenges of family dynamics in billion-dollar businesses and the potential costs of extreme privacy. Today, business schools study Mars Inc. as a unique case, a colossal enterprise run almost entirely in private, shielded from market pressures, yet fiercely competitive. The Mars name has become synonymous not just with chocolate and pet food, but with an unyielding, almost enigmatic vision of family and business. In the end, John Mars' legacy may be less about individual fame and more about a profound lesson. Sometimes, the greatest power lies in silence. John Mars stands as a towering figure not because of flamboyance or public spectacle, but because of his steadfast dedication to protecting one of the world's largest private family businesses. His life is a study in the delicate balance between immense wealth and the desire for privacy, between power and the personal costs of maintaining it. Unlike many billionaire stories filled with scandals or dramatic downfalls, John's tale is quieter, marked by subtle tensions, behind-the-scenes battles, and a family's effort to remain united despite deep differences. His journey teaches us that sometimes the most significant struggles happen away from the public eye, in private boardrooms and family dinners. John's story also reveals the price of secrecy. The Mars family's commitment to privacy protected their empire for decades, but also created challenges, internal rifts, succession uncertainties, and criticisms of opacity in an age demanding transparency. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how much wealth one accumulates, family dynamics and personal relationships can be the hardest territory to navigate. Yet, John Mars's legacy is far from a cautionary tale alone. It is a lesson in endurance, stewardship, and humility. His life embodies the philosophy that true power sometimes means knowing when to step back, to let others lead, and to guard a legacy quietly but fiercely. What remains most striking about John is that his greatest achievements were never broadcast in headlines or television interviews. They were etched in decades of careful management, in the ongoing strength of Mars Inc., and in the family's commitment to shaping their own destiny on their own terms. As the next generation prepares to take up the mantle, the world watches quietly, intrigued by this billionaire family that chose to live in the shadows but left an unmistakable mark on global business. If you found this story eye-opening, subscribe and stay tuned for more hidden truths from the world's richest.